Hey, welcome back to RBB. I'm Aaron, and this is Ben Edman from Fundamental Shooting. Ben, how you been?
It's a beautiful day.
Beautiful wet day in Washington. All right. Hey, it's my understanding that you've developed a new course that you want to talk about today, and because the course is covers a lot of different topics, I think we had talked about it earlier, and it'd be better if we broke these up into smaller pieces where we could talk about the different components of each of that go into the class. So, but before we do that, why don't we talk about,
What does it mean to get into self-defense?
yeah, Ben, one of the things that I know that we talked about leading up to this discussion today, that it seems as though a lot of planets, unfortunate planets, have aligned. Law enforcement and the laws that govern them have seemed to pull back a little bit, or in some cases a lot, depending upon what jurisdiction you're in. And people are starting to feel, I believe, more than any time in my lifetime, that their their own safety is their own responsibility. So I think that not only talking about the difference between the tools and the weapon doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to hurt people. It means that it has to be flexible enough to understand when it's time to de-escalate, and when you're starting to read those indicators that you were talking about where people are not going to de-escalate, and what do you do now? The answer isn't always, like you said, it's not always to go to a gun. And some people are prohibited from having that, especially if they happen to work under certain conditions, and they could lose their job if they're discovered to have those tools on them. But yet they still need those self-defense concepts that you were talking about. So I'd like to ask you today, if there was a golden rule of self-defense, the first thing that you would put out, or the most important thing that you're going to talk about in your class, and I'm not asking you to teach your class here, what would you say would be one or maybe two of those most important things that you're going to touch on in your class?
So, hey, I make a joke all the time. Two rules of a gunfight. Rule number one is don't be there, and that's ultimately what it comes down to. I mean, you don't want to be there. You don't want to pull the trigger. You don't want to pull your gun. You don't want to go down that path. So anything that I can do to bring my awareness up, so that I can spot problems before they come anywhere near me, that gives me an opportunity to go elsewhere. So the main thing is just not be there. And how do you not be there? Well, you gotta have the right mindset. And the mindset kind of breaks down into both. I have a mindset that says that I'm going to take my security personally and seriously. I'm going to work at developing these skills in order to get there, and I'm going to survive. I'm going to survive the encounter. I mean, above all, 80% of gunshot wounds are survivable. And so, with that as a mindset, you've got to go into it. I'm going home. I'm going home. I got a responsibility to go home. So, having that tactical mindset, and then you can put tactics right behind that. So, I think it's James Yeager used to say, mindset, tactics, skills, gear, and I think that's an excellent progression. Starts off with that mindset of just an awareness, tactics, my tactics, being able to improve my tactical situation so that I have a plan for getting to the car, a plan for when I'm out in public, a plan for when I'm with my family. When I've predetermined, our brains function kind of like an index card. There's a Rolodex of blank cards, and
I may have to stop and explain to some of our younger viewers exactly what a Rolodex is, or go ask your parents or grandparents. We, in our generation, we knew what the Rolodex was, and it had a lot of information in it that you could acquire very rapidly, with just the turn of a well, of the Rolodex knob. So that's what we're talking about, is having a lot of that knowledge that you may need in any given situation, almost at your fingertips. So, am I close?
Yeah, there we go.
Okay.
There we go. All right. So, our brains. A lot of people think of fight or flight, and in a fight or flight situation, they miss the most common, and the most common response is freeze.
Sure.
And the most common response is freeze because our brains haven't thought about these situations before. Our brains have not experienced it before. So it pulls up this blank card and doesn't know what to do with the situation. Well, we can kind of short step that process by at least putting some scenarios out there which get our conscious brain thinking. And all you have to do is think about it or experience it once, and that gets filed away into the annexes of the brain someplace. And we're hoping that in the event that the worst scenario happens, you run into that kind of situation, you're not going to go to freeze because your brain is going to pull up that one card that says, "Oh, I kind of thought about that at one point in time, and now I can react."
Yeah.
And the sooner I can react, the sooner I can make good choices in order to survive.
Well said.
So ultimately, our whole concept is just firearms are great. You should train with a firearm. It's a fantastic tool, but self-defense is a much bigger picture. I don't want to scare people into being paranoid,
Right.
and yet at the same time, the reality is that we walk around in a bubble. And
Correct.
And as we're walking around in that bubble, we believe that everybody around us believes what we believe, that holds the same morals and the same value system that we do. And just because we would never contemplate harming somebody, it doesn't even occur to us that somebody else doesn't have that same mindset.
Right.
And so, all too often, somebody comes along and bursts that bubble. And so the people that tend to come to us that are genuinely seekers have had an experience where their bubble got popped.
Right.
And hopefully it was not that traumatic of an experience. But once you're into that, your bubble's been popped, you've opened yourself up to a whole new world. And that can be a terrifying place for some people.
Right.
So
it's interesting that you mentioned that, and I know that we had discussed this before, but in the law enforcement realm, when someone gets hired as a law enforcement officer, they'll go to the academy. That's when they'll start their initial firearms training, and then they'll go out and they'll do sort of an on-the-job field training program along with a veteran officer. And ultimately, they could go, depending upon where they worked, they could go a whole year or maybe a couple, 3, 5 years before they really have an experience that they feel as though they may have had to use deadly force on someone. And I can tell you that, having been a firearms instructor for a long time, when you see those folks who just did what they needed to do because the firearm was a tool of the trade, and it was something that they were required to maintain a minimum level of proficiency with, when they finally had that experience that kind of shook them and woke them up that, now I need to understand this tool at a deeper level, you could see them being more interested in learning and developing their skills and asking much more pointed questions than you saw them do before. So I think that you're onto something there, that when you talk about the concept of us all being in our own little bubbles, and we have someone who tries to prick that bubble, and it affects us to where we realize maybe I'm not as prepared as I thought I was, that people may be seeking out that self-defense training, not only, well, number one, in some cases, because they want an answer for that problem that they dealt with before, because they didn't feel like they dealt with it very well. And so once they realize that, that's not the only situation I may find, there may be other people in the class who had that same feeling or that same situation, but it was different for them. And so, like you said, you have these seekers who are looking for answers, and maybe in the circles that they travel in with the other folks that they're with, it's not a group that they would get those types of answers from. And so seeking out some professional training where they could perhaps ask questions, get feedback, and in some cases even get correction on what they thought would happen or what they think might happen, by someone who has done the research and can give those answers. So I wholeheartedly agree with you that when the student is ready, the information is available for them. So let me ask you about another topic. Perhaps you have to have interaction with law enforcement. Is there a section in your training in dealing with law enforcement in the aftermath of some sort of an event where you had to use force, and not necessarily deadly force? But is that something that you would cover in your block of training?
Yeah, that's one of those. There's a ton of videos out there. I'm sure you've seen the one that says, don't talk to the cops ever, don't talk to the police ever. Great video. I thoroughly enjoyed it. But and there's a response to that one that I saw, which was talking about, well, no, there really are some times there's some information that you really do need to share with the police, and really making sure that you understand whether what you're reporting as a crime, and making sure that you're getting it on record, and at the same time making sure that we're prepared enough to say, officer, I don't wish to make any further statements at this time until I've had an opportunity to speak with my attorney. We are never going to rise to our level of expectations. We are going to sink to our level of training. No matter what it is, you will think that, okay, well, I'm just going to do this when this happens. Well, have you ever practiced that? Have you ever picked up a phone and called 911, pretended dialing 911, and had a script as to what you were going to say in the event that something horrible has happened to you? The adrenaline that's dumping at that point, you're going to sink to whatever you've practiced. So going back to that Rolodex concept is we can at least put some thought processes out there where we can trigger some practice, some things that you can think about, that you can plan in advance. What exactly am I going to say? What am I going to say on the phone call to 911? What am I going to say to the officers that are responding? And what am I not going to say, so that I can make sure that I at least have a proper conversation with my attorney before I get locked into some statement. I've been through a traumatic experience. I'm not ready to make any statements at this time.
Yep. Well, it's interesting that you say that, and I will second what you're saying, is that law enforcement is not your friend. The law enforcement is there to investigate crimes in general and to gather information. Declining to give additional information to law enforcement, the first thing that you need to understand is that you're not being rude to the police officer. You're not going to offend that officer. They understand that you and your actions are being scrutinized. They will try to get information from you, but when you put the brakes on and say, I'm declining to give any additional information, that is not you as an individual insulting them or causing an emotional response from the officer. They are there, and they should be there, to gather information within their ability to do so. And once that is accomplished and they can go no further, then it's out of their hands, and it should be out of their hands. And so looking after your own rights is absolutely your number one goal. And that is part of self-defense. And it's good that you're including that in the class that you're doing.
Make sure that when you're talking to that officer, respect goes a long way. And that's true with people in general. Respect goes a long way. Unfortunately, a lot of people think respect comes, it has to be earned. And the cop comes in and he's got a bad attitude and whatever. Give him the respect of the uniform, if nothing else, even if he's being a jerk. Give the respect to the uniform and the badge. That is not the time and place to have that debate. That is not the time and place to have that discussion.
And that's exactly it. Is people don't understand what their rights are, and so their common courtesies take over, and the concept of being a good person, But like you said before, when most people don't go out about their day expecting to be in some sort of a physical altercation, and it really changes your view, and it will change your view for quite a while, because it takes a number of different sleep cycles. And I know I'm getting kind of deep into this, but it takes more than just a couple of hours to put this in the perspective of your whole life. It's something that really affects you, and it will affect you, like we said, in a lot of cases, until you have some way of answering what you may feel is correctly. How should I have handled that, or what could I have done differently? And there's a lot of different emotional soul searching that goes along with that. But the time the time to do that is not when you're standing in front of law enforcement saying, well, I did this, but I should have done this, or I could have done this. That's not the time. And so understanding that there is a time to give feedback. I was involved in this situation. After that, declining and saying, I'm going to need to speak to my counsel before I give any additional information is not only appropriate, it's part of the self-defense package, I believe, of ensuring that you win the fight, win in court, and keep your family and keep your stuff.
So one thing that you just touched on a few minutes ago, we're so culturally influenced, and it's amazing the things that we will turn off our common sense. Our spidey senses tingle, and we think that there's something, but we don't want to be that guy or that gal. We don't want to be perceived as racist or homophobic or whatever.
Sure.
And so we ignore and we put ourselves into harm's way. Gavin DeBecker's book, The Gift of Fear, talking about the woman who's preparing to get into the elevator, and there was a big scary guy, but she didn't want to be perceived as that gal, and so she gets into this elevator, this 6x6 soundproof box with a guy twice her size, and nearly every
alarm bell is ringing.
Yeah.
Hey, maybe this isn't the best. Yeah, I had a chance to see that, and we circumvent our own common sense sometimes, and it's okay. Our species developed those spidey senses. Whether you believe in creation or evolution, it doesn't matter. Those things happen to us for a reason, right? And sometimes a lot of times it's worth listening to.
Our brains pick up like 40,000 kilobits of information every second or something. I don't remember the exact number, but it's a huge amount. But we can only process so much at a time.
Right.
Well, that means that it's those instincts that are picking up on the rest of it. You hear and see everything, but you can't think through that fast enough.
Right.
But if you can at least rely on those senses, and there's some simple techniques. If you step out into the parking lot and you see something that looks odd, okay, what's the worst case scenario if you just turn around and go back in? Somebody might notice you and say, "Gee, that was weird." I mean, who cares? Right. But if you really want to do some theater for him, just pull your phone out, look at the phone, and roll your eyes a little bit, put it back in, and then you go back in and go inside. Yeah. I mean, it's that simple. That there are ways that we can react and respond, or just start patting your pockets and as if you forgot something and go back inside. And one of the most important skills is de-escalation. Being able to have those verbal communication skills and knowing in particular the difference between when it's a stranger and when it's somebody that I'm responsible for or engaged with or connected to, and having being able to understand some of the simple things of connecting, empathizing, emulating what I want you to do. If I want you to lower your voice, then I start by lowering my voice. And if I want you to breathe deeply, I just start taking some deep breaths. And that kind of human interaction, again, we're so self-absorbed. We're so stuck in our phones and in our world, and it's our rights and it's our this, and we've shut people down. We need to learn how to win friends and influence people. Not to drop another book on you, but
Dale Carnegie.
Dale Carnegie's got it down. That goes a long way to de-escalation when somebody feels heard, when somebody feels understood, when somebody's genuinely trying to connect with you. Right. And you can do that by naming their emotions. Or they can say, no, I'm not upset about that at all. It's this whole other thing. Yeah. But that at least gives me information, and now I have a whole new direction to go with. Right. So, being able to cover some of those types of things at a very high level, it's so... it's imperative to just your everyday interactions with people on the street, boss, spouse, kids,
right.
Working on some of those negotiation skills where you can figure out how to get what you want out of the situation. And again, if it's a stranger, I just want to disengage. Right. I just want to get away from the scenario. Right. And if I got to eat crow in order to make that happen, crow's mighty tasty with a little extra barbecue sauce.
Well, and especially when you're looking at avoiding, having to go to court to answer for what you did because it got escalated. And that sounds like a great topic, and there's a lot of really good information to kind of point people towards. But having said that avoidance, de-escalation, avoidance is something you choose to do. De-escalation is something that you have to work with the other person, and sometimes some folks are not de-escalatable.
Oh, absolutely.
And we could get into those situations where you seem to be trapped, whether it's on an elevator or you have to be in a subway that is going down the tracks and someone's shouting that I'm going to commit a felony with someone in here, the Daniel Penny, unfortunately, and there really doesn't seem to be a way that this person doesn't seem to be reasonable, so the de-escalation doesn't work.
Yeah,
and
emergency situations require emergency responses. You cannot de-escalate. That is not the time to. Well, it seems like you're really upset about this, and that's not the time and place. If somebody's doing something along those lines, and that's kind of where we go from down into skills.
Right.
We need to then start looking at our skills. What kind of skills do we have? Do we have empty-handed skills? Do we know how to throw a 1-2 punch? Do we know how to throw a front kick? Have we ever been grappling with somebody? If you haven't practiced any of those things, and most of that stuff it does not take nearly as much energy and effort as you think. You can learn how to throw a 1-2 punch off of YouTube, and 15 minutes of reasonable videos, of training videos,
right.
And then maybe an hour of intentional practice at the gym, followed by 10 minutes follow-up a couple of times a week.
Yeah.
And you can do the same thing with a front kick and a 1-2 punch and a front kick. Man, those are some really valuable skills to have, particularly if you're trying to kick somebody out of an elevator.
Yeah. Well, and that leads into, I think, everything you're talking about there is kind of a gut check for folks who kind of feel like maybe their self-defense skills, or maybe they had that blind spot where they feel they need to sort of get a little more training and develop some more skills. One of those is maybe the physical fitness aspect is something that if the student hasn't considered that in a while, the health benefits that you can receive over and above just self-defense is something that is going to make your whole life better. It'll prolong your life. It'll make the life that you have.
You're defending yourself against death.
Exactly. Well,
so,
exactly.
So you can take that to an extensive piece. But yeah, and all the people that say, "Well, I would just," and it just I roll my eyes every time I hear the "I would just." Well, really? Have you practiced?
Right.
Can you run 100 yards? I mean, maybe you can, and I'm thrilled for you.
Or the one that really makes me nervous is someone who hasn't put enough effort into their physical fitness, and their answer is, I would just shoot them. Well, I'm not so sure that's a good idea. I'm not sure, again, that goes back to your hammer and nail analogy, is you don't want to know what kind of problems you could be bringing on yourself if it's not a gun solution, if it's not a deadly force solution, just by saying, I would just, like you're talking about.
And we talk about that in the class. We talk about the use of force, escalation, de-escalation, starting off with our words, ask, tell, make, going through, what is lethal force? What is ordinary force? What is, when are you allowed to use these things? What's the force continuum? And the force continuum, sometimes people think that you have to go through a linear progression. Well, I got to start by telling him this, and then I got to threaten him with that, and then I got to hit him with this, and then I can shoot him. Well, I go back to emergency situations, call for emergency actions. If somebody walks through the door with an AK-47, I don't have to wait for him to announce his intentions if he's dressed for action. And it's not an environment where we expect somebody with an AK-47.
You're reading the situation, the look on their face, the way they're holding the gun, all of that comes into play to making your decisions, like where you're at. Are you at a gun range and they don't have a gun case? You're exactly right. Not only that is disparity, the ability and the force disparity. What you and I would be capable of doing would be vastly different than some, say, smaller statured person who maybe has some sort of infirmity. They have some sort of a disability. Maybe they're in a wheelchair or what have you. And I'm not saying that, they get a green light to go around just, solving all their problems with a gun, but society, those people that might end up on your jury, may expect that you and I would be able to do certain things that perhaps other people don't have the skills, knowledge, and ability to do because of their situation. So you're exactly right. Is even teaching even teaching the class and the use of force continuum, what certain people are capable of. A lot of situations I can just run away. You could just run away. However, if our family is there with us,
That's right.
which includes our spouse and our children, running away defeats the purpose of being a protector for your family, which I'm sure that your spouse would also want to be. But again, you can't just run away from every situation depending upon who you're with. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be in the mall and you're the savior of everybody in the mall. Again, it's in the realm of reasonableness. But again, that's what we're talking about is, have you thought about this stuff? And what are your boundaries? Where are your parameters of what you're willing to do and what you're willing to run away from?
When are you going to move towards, and when are you going to move away from? And what's your plan? And there's no right or wrong answer. You can do all of the above. Not my circus, not my monkeys is perfectly acceptable.
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, some of us feel that we have a moral obligation to step in, that we have a responsibility to our fellow man, that we're going to use the skills and the tools that we have at our disposal, because we want the world to be a better place. We want the world to be a safer place. And so, all of these things are and so much more cover in the whole conversation of self-defense.
Ben, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to seeing you real soon.
All right.
Thank you, my man.